Hey, Black mothers and others. Thank you for joining me for the Free Black Motherhood podcast. Free Black Motherhood is a social movement that wants to accompany Black mothers in their journey to owning their agency. We do this by offering educational spaces, tools, and most importantly, community. Here in the space of Free Black Motherhood, we have a vision for the world. That vision is that Black mothers have the resources and tools to remain present and grounded within ourselves despite the complexities of raising children in today's world. We also believe that we deserve the same freedom and healing that we want for our children. This space is ran by me, Meadows-Fernandez, a speaker, writer, facilitator, and community organizer, and of course, a mother of 2 kids. I can't wait to see the conversations and exchanges we'll have. Without further ado, let's get into it. Hey y'all, hey! I'm so excited to share this time with you today. But before we get into it, I want to tell you about our upcoming guest. Our guest today is Gloria Joy Sherrod. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor, an author, a documentary producer, a content creator, a mental health advocate, and an ADHD coach. The girl does it all. She has an innate passion for helping others learn more about their strengths and weaknesses, overcome life's hurdles, and build a life that works for them. She has helped many overwhelmed professionals, parents, and students navigate their daily lives through addressing executive functioning skills and providing accountability strategies and education. There's more. She is the author of Adulting with ADHD, Navigating Adult Life with Attention Deficit Disorder. She is a TEDx speaker. She provides group support for parents who need help with this transition. And she is someone who has ADHD herself. It was so lovely to connect with Gloria and have both the personal and the professional and intellectual connections to this topic. I cannot wait to hear how y'all feel about this conversation. All right, let's get into it. Thank you so much for being willing to chat with me today, Gloria. I am extremely excited about all of the things that we're going to dive into and just folks hearing more about you and your history and platform and just all of the wonderful things that you've been up to these days. And so to kind of get us started and make sure we're all coming from a similar point, can you tell us what ADHD actually is and some of the misconceptions that exist around it?
Absolutely. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a very misleading name for what it actually is. First of all, there is inattentive type and there's hyperactive type, hyperactive impulsive type, and then there's combined type. So there are people who have both. So some people with ADHD, and it still includes the H, even if you're more inattentive, are just more inattentive. They have trouble planning, organizing, all those different executive functioning skills, task initiation, like doing things that you intend to do, all of those things. And then there are some people who have the more hyperactive impulsive type. So impulsivity, whether that be with their actions, with their words, sometimes with their thoughts, their behaviors. So they might also have some of that trouble organizing and planning and all of that. But in addition, they have this hyperactivity and impulsive. And then there are people who have combined, which I would say most people probably have combined type, and it can even change throughout your lifespan. So as a child, you can have primarily hyperactive impulsive type, and you can get a little bit older and have primarily inattentive type. So it's not like once you get the diagnosis, that's the type you have forever, but it actually can fluctuate depending on life circumstances, just how things are in your life. And we find that a lot of hyperactivity can be internal. It can be in your mind. It might not be that you're physically moving a whole lot. And that's one of the misconceptions. Even when my daughter got diagnosed, initially when we went to a pediatrician who wasn't very familiar with ADHD, and she's like, well, she's not like bouncing off the walls, which I mean, in reality, she really was the kind of like a very active, physically active kid. But in that 5 minutes in that office, she wasn't. And she's like, well, I don't think she could have ADHD because she's not moving a whole lot. And that's not necessarily how that always works. Sometimes it's just like a lot of racing thoughts when they're talking, maybe moving from subject to subject, talking really fast, talking a lot. So hyperactivity doesn't always look like the stereotypical running around type of hyperactivity that you might imagine. And then I think a common misconception is that we can't focus at all. A lot of
Mm.
us can focus really hard on the things that we really enjoy, that we're interested in, and depending on the conditions as well. And so it's really a dysregulation in our attention and our ability to control that attention when we need to control it versus actually a inability to focus overall.
Hmm. I really appreciate that explanation. And one of the things that kind of comes up for me top of mind and why I was so excited to connect with you is a lot of the work that I do around free Black motherhood is like calling out this idea of intensive mothering, right? And this idea of martyr based motherhood, that mothers should be everything and execute it pretty much perfectly and sacrificially. And what blew me away, not only as a mom with ADHD, but as like just kind of interacting with your content, watching your TED Talks, getting your TED Talk, getting an opportunity to watch your documentary, is that so much of those things you named are actually in direct opposition to the stereotypes of who you should be as a mother.
Hmm.
And I would love to hear later in the conversation. I want to get more into the specifics of your daughter's diagnoses, kind of motivating your own journey. But even just top of mind, I'm curious, like, how have you seen some of the qualities that we have as folks with ADHD being in direct challenge to motherhood
Oh man. And
stereotypes?
for sure, in all the ways. Right now, top of mind for me is back to school. I think for me, when my daughter entered kindergarten, I realized, oh, I'm doing this school thing all over again for myself. And all the things that I struggled with as a child in school, I'm facing that again right now as the parent. So, like keeping up with all of the papers, making sure things get signed on time, making sure they get to school on time, making sure that you're communicating with the teacher before things get out of hand if things are not going well. There are a million things, scheduling doctor's appointments, remembering to do that, remembering to show up, showing up on time. So there's all these things. You're kind of being everything to everyone as a mother, and as a wife, to even the stereotypes of what a wife should be,
Yep.
making sure that you are the person that's keeping up with all the things for everyone can be a huge challenge. And I think that as women are starting to get diagnosed more often now, I find that women already are held to this higher standard about what they should be doing. Technically, I feel like we're doing a really good job considering all the responsibilities that are placed on us, and men are then not always placed in that same position to have to be all these things to everyone and do all these things. And it might make them feel like their diagnosis is not as important to address as women sometimes.
Mhm.
So that's something that I've found to be a huge issue nowadays.
That's a really interesting point. And like adding those identity layers is something I'm always excited about, just looking at the nuances and things. And one of the questions that kind of pops up, or the curiosities, as I like to call them, is how having ADHD and being a mother and being a Black mother can kind of create this sandwiched compound, knowing that we're already doing so much to advocate for our children anyway. And then, like, oh no, here I come. And I'm like, all of these big things, like, have you ever had that experience? We just had some of the meet the teachers, and I'm like, oh no, I'm going to be all of this. And the teachers are going to be just overwhelmed. But also, this is my job to advocate for my kid, and you go get this ADHD chaos.
Period. Yes. I have found it easier over time for myself, but in the beginning, I think it was really difficult for me to try to decide how I'm going to show up in the school space. And I was even working in the
Mm.
school, so I knew behind the scenes how Black mothers were interpreted by the school system when you advocate, when you speak up for your child, and the assumptions that are made about children and their behaviors when you're a Black mother, that maybe you're, not doing a good job, or you're not showing up for your child, or it's your fault that your child has these ADHD symptoms, and that perhaps when you do advocate or when you speak up, being labeled aggressive. So having to manage all of those different things, having to advocate for, you know, we know that Black children are focused on in the classroom more often. They're the ones being watched. When everybody else might be exhibiting the same behaviors, they might be the ones that get pointed out. So, kind of being able
Yep.
to balance, your own interpretations of what the teacher is saying and observing about your child in the classroom, being able to advocate, and then being able to advocate effectively, knowing that depending on the school system too, but overall in general, systemically, there is this bias that we're aggressive and many other things that might be at odds with our ability to advocate for our children.
Hmm. And I know that look, from experience, at least in my life, there's such a heavy mental and emotional consequence of having to navigate things that way,
Mhm.
um, that literally does keep me up at night sometimes. And at the same time, one of the things that there are certain things that I know not only because of who I am that I kick ass at, right? And there's a term that you coined called streakness. And I feel like it really shows up in some of the ways when we navigate this experience. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I find that the things that we're really good at and the things that we're not so good at are often two sides of the same coin. I would say that my intense focus on things that I'm interested in and things that I really care about is what helped me be able to do all of the research that I needed to do to advocate for my child, for example, in these situations. And sometimes my emotional intensity as a person with ADHD, needing to like rein that in some ways, but also being able to use that assertiveness to advocate. So there's always this dance and this balance of the things that we might struggle with. We might struggle with organizing and planning and doing getting things done on time, but at the same time, there's these other things that we might be really good at. For example, creative thinking and the ability to think outside of the box. One thing that I did for my daughter one year when she had a teacher that like really was not experienced at all in ADHD and dealing with children with learning differences was I made a chart with all of my daughter's strengths, all the things that she was really good at, all the things that she excelled at in school, ways that she could be motivated individually, and I put those directly next to things that were more difficult for her so that I could show this teacher, yes, she might struggle with doing these concrete, very rigid assignments, but at the same time, if you give her a project and an open ended prompt, she can be super creative and do a really good job. So I was kind of
Mm.
showing her, and at the same time, she might get really overwhelmed if the classroom's too loud. But at the same time, on the very other side of that, she has a really good ear for music. And so her sensory overload and her sensory sensitivity kind of is a strength in other ways. So being able to create that chart and be creative and think outside of the box about my child and to express that to someone else was something that I feel as a person with ADHD, I was able to be creative enough to create that resource.
That is really cool and creative. And I don't know if you've ever shared what that looks like online, but I want to see it because that sounds amazing. I would love to see kind of just what that looks like because I think that would be a really helpful exercise for folks to do. It's something that I say a lot um, when I'm talking about free Black motherhood stuff is I say freeing myself, the children will follow, right? And that's cute. But what we really know is most of the time we're freeing our kids and then we find some kind of freedom or liberation along the way, you know? And so maybe it's more of a goalpost or a vision than a mantra. But yes, so kind of hearing that, what I love about this idea of making a chart with our children's skills alongside some of their challenges is that it also presents an opportunity to reflect on what that is for ourselves and where those areas we may really struggle connected to where we may thrive. So like my similar experience is both of my little humans go to occupational therapy. It's kind of like work on some of that emotional regulation, stuff like that. And at first, like a lot of people, I had no idea what occupational therapy was, like what the purpose was. It made me think of occupational therapy. Well, actually, I just said that. No, occupation as in job, not
Oh, yeah.
occupation. Yes. So it was easy for me to get those two things confused initially, and then kind of finding out that it's more of like a play therapy where you work on some of those more concrete social skills and practices that you don't usually have. And us kind of being on this journey for the last couple of years, they've done something called a sensory diet, and just seeing them kind of map out like, here is when I'm in the red zone, here's when I'm in the green zone, here's when I'm in like the yellow zone, and watching them have a plan in place for when they're feeling overwhelmed and dysregulated. And something I've been doing theoretically that I need to put into practice is seeing how I can adopt that model and saying like, wait a second, I have those same times of overwhelm, those same lulls, those same kind of moments of agitation. How can I make a sensory diet for myself to basically have a plan of action so I'm not just out here stressed and panicking? Because as we know, as moms, when we feel dysregulated, like the if it just the ramifications kind of flow through the whole house.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's because of the distribution of labor. Other times, if you're like me, it's just because you have a really big personality and it takes up a lot of space in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And so just kind of hearing that and thinking about that. And now I'm trying to remember why I was telling you that. I'm sure it connected to something, but just really loving that very specific and concrete example of what we're kind of going through. And so with that in mind, I would like to hear, what was it like to see elements of yourself in your daughter or vice versa as you were going through getting her diagnosed and then seeing like, wait a second, I might need some more check-in or insight myself?
That was an interesting journey. I feel like I remember in elementary school checking out a book about ADHD and telling my parents, I think I have this. And
Hmm.
in my very traditional Black household, that was not a thing. Like, okay, yeah, you're good, whatever. And that was kind of how things were after that. Is, never brought it up again. I knew that that wasn't something that they were going to be receptive about. So I kind of just struggled my way through school in that way. I think I was lucky that they weren't super hard on me about my grades and all of those things, but they also weren't understanding of neurodivergence and all of that, of course. And so when I got older, I started working with a lot of children. I was working in an elementary school. I was working in an elementary school and a university at the same time because one was my internship and one was my job. So I was seeing it across the spectrum. I was seeing people with ADHD. So I'm seeing it at work. And then at the same time, my daughter's in kindergarten. And I'm like, okay, she's struggling. This looks very similar to what I'm seeing at work. This looks very similar to what I've seen in myself growing up. Something is happening here. So I originally got her diagnosis. Hers ADHD is a lot different than mine. For
Hmm.
her, the first signs of it when she was in school were that she was talking a whole lot in class and she was just kind of like all over the place and all that. Yeah, she was a talk and I was very quiet. So I was complete opposite. I was inattentive for the most part. Um, yeah, sort of. I think outside of school, I had some anxiety at school with speaking and being disruptive. Outside of school, I was, jumping off the roof. But for her in school, the phone call that I got was that she's struggling to organize herself. She's not really grasping onto the routines like you would expect at the time that she was supposed to. And kind of processing a lot of the information when it came to learning to read was difficult. And that was something like I had been working on letters and reading and stuff with her since she was like 2. And it wasn't really like catching on like we thought it would be, especially because she could have a conversation with you like she was 30. So like her literacy and like her ability to speak were not in line. And so that's when we were like, okay, something's up, and we got her diagnosed. But her journey it was very different than mine. We have some similarities in like the organization, the planning, the ability to keep your desk clean and all that, keeping your room clean. But it's interesting sometimes to see how different her symptoms are from mine, especially as she gets older. The more I think about it, she just did a personality test and it was like really good at math and science, very logical. I am so opposite. I am very like emotional, intuitive, like trash at math. She's in honors math. I was in the opposite of honors math, whatever that, the lower math class.
Yeah.
So it's actually an interesting journey for me to like adjust to the way that her ADHD presents differently than mine. But the fact that I understand what it's like to have ADHD and to struggle even when you are brilliant has helped me be able to support her.
Hmm. That brings up a lot of things for me. And one of them, you were saying like your daughter's expression at school was more like being talkative and stuff like that. So things that didn't make sense until decades later is when I was maybe in the fourth grade, I was put on a behavior plan for talking. It's like,
Mm.
first off, that seems like a lot. That's a pretty severe punishment for talking a lot. And and like one of the layers of the conversation that's always been really interesting to me is because like kind of listening to and learning more about your story and being in graduate school and folks being like, wait a second, you're in graduate school. How do you have ADHD? And, like all of these different things, how for a number of us, we're not just experiencing ADHD, but we might be experiencing ADHD and learning disorders, or we might be experiencing ADHD and giftedness. And when you mix all of these things in there, if you don't have a support for anyone generally, that's kind of a lot to handle. But I just think about being like a young Black girl and at home being told, Am, you're brilliant. You can take on the world. The way you think of things is so amazing and abstract. And then getting to school and being punished for talking too much, having to sit with my nose in a circle in the corner, getting sent to the principal a lot, being paddled, as well as like kind of not understanding things that were more rigid. And just so much of that journey for me, I'm still kind of processing that now, is saying like, wait a second, how can I feel so brilliant in one context and be affirmed in that, and also feel like I mean this not to disparage myself or anyone else, but just to say what it felt like, feel like an idiot in other circumstances. It's like you feel like you have the ability to process the greatest concepts, and also not understand the smallest little simple things sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
Absolutely.
just like I would joke sometimes, again, maybe not the best, and I would say like I feel like I'm either the dumbest smart person or the smartest dumb person who has ever existed. And not
So relatable.
and not knowing
Yes.
what to do with that.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely tricky. And then I think too, from the outside, when you are really brilliant in some areas and then you struggle with things that other people would be considered to be simple, then they're like, well, if you can do that, why can't you just do that? It just doesn't make sense. And
Mhm.
I think that response is what makes it even harder when it comes to something that is technically invisible to other people. It's like, you're doing this on purpose because if you could do
Mhm.
that, you could do this.
Yep, very much that. And like, again, one of my areas that I'm really interested in, I'm just trying to figure out how to dive into it, is, like the concept of Black girlhood and how we are adultified so young. A lot of times we don't have a childhood. And so we're kind of living our lives in preparation for all that responsibility of Black womanhood. And it's like, well, wait a second. You're not doing the task right. There are certain expectations I have of you, a certain level of responsibility, a certain level of productivity, a certain level of just everything. And then when you have ADHD, you're just kind of like, well, depending on one's experience, at least for me, it was just like, okay, well, I can't fit your script. And kind of your point about our biggest challenges being connected to some of our most significant successes and skills is, although I cannot stand the way that I was labeled and assumptions were made about me, and because of those little things, I wasn't allowed in like the formal gifted program and all of those kind of things, being excluded and marginalized in that experience is what made me the creative thinker I am today. I had to
Mm.
create my own lane.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say power because that would be so cliche, but I think that's really cool that it was just like, okay, you didn't fit, so you had to make your own.
Mhm. Yeah. I actually was just talking to my dad about that the other day because though, like I said, ADHD was not something that my parents were receptive of. Clearly, my dad both my parents are neurodivergent, and they are very much like follow the dopamine in their own lives. Both my
Mhm.
parents are entrepreneurs, and they kind of just like do whatever they feel is their purpose and their interest in life. My dad writes, he's a photographer, he's a pastor, he like does all these different things. And so growing up, I got to see people do different things and feel like you don't have to be in a box. And they allowed me to kind of just be creative. So, I had a lot of free time growing up just at home doing whatever. I made videos too when I was a kid.
Mm.
I would do all kind of creative projects, play instruments, just do kind of whatever, just floating around the house, being an ADHD kid. And I think that the fact that they allowed me to just kind of be who I was, even though I wasn't this like straight A student and I wasn't this like gifted program kid, allowed me to keep some of that creativity that sometimes structured education can take
Mhm.
away from us. So to that point, I agree. I think that in some ways, I'm really grateful that I didn't fit in the box, and I also wasn't forced to fit in the box either.
Yes, I really appreciate that, and you kind of bring home something that has been kind of that I've kind of talked around, but that I think is worth saying explicitly is as parents, when we, like, again, not to paint us all with a wide brush because there's variation, but the folks that I have interacted with who are parenting, especially mothering with ADHD, we find the most creative ways to engage with our children. And we like we just give them we don't necessarily thrive in structure, and also that flexibility and that skill of knowing how to maneuver and have your own interests and do independent play. I think that can be such a gift when we're aware that we need some balance of the other side, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
Because in our house, my husband is like the structured person. And so he's like "Are your teeth brushed? It's bedtime together. Do you have both of your shoes on?" And I'm just like, "Whoa, did you have your favorite like thing? Let's read a book. Let's do." And I don't know what their lives would be like if they didn't have us for balance, because I think he's very structured. But interestingly enough, his mom said that when he was young, like his instructors suspected that he had ADHD. And I think because of his childhood experiences, he had to more so internalize that and kind of create like a very rigid system of things. Because when I've seen it in the mornings, when he's getting ready for work, if his like he has a set of things, and if I come in while he's brushing his teeth, he's gonna forget to brush his hair. And then like one thing puts a cog in the rotation, like everything kind of crumbles. He's like, wait, you don't interrupt him during his routine, or
Yes.
everything is going to fall apart. And I think it's so interesting how we develop our own systems and kind of coping strategies to navigate those things. Because one of the things that I've learned, and it took me a while to realize this, but I use a lot of voice to text and I use a lot of read aloud on my computer. And it took a long time to understand that that was me making an accommodation, because sometimes reading things directly can be hard for me to grasp, especially depending on what it's about, you know? And so I'm just curious, like for you and for mothers you might have like connected with in your work, what are some of the interesting accommodations that folks they have either seen folks have, or that you would encourage folks to try as they're navigating this journey?
Ooh, that's like a really big question. I feel like there are like a million different things that I've read over my years working with ADHD. I'm
Hmm.
always super intrigued by the different ways that people find accommodation. The first thing that pops in my mind, the really creative one, when you said accommodations or creative accommodations, was when you are doing tasks that you find to be boring, pretend like you're on a TV show or like a reality show and like narrate your way through the activity. I find that sometimes with like cooking and things like that, that's kind of fun to just like pretend I'm on a cooking show and I'm making dinner to make it just a little bit more interesting. But anything you can do to make a task more interesting and more engaging or to gamify it, I find to be helpful. So music is really helpful. Lately, actually, when I cook, I always watch like a judge show. And for some reason, now that I've have my recipes that are in my head, so I don't have to worry about needing my phone for the recipe and for TV, I can like watch my judge shows and cook. So that helps. Let's see. For some people, I find that like time blocking helps a whole lot, or kind of sandwiching in your time so that you don't have a bunch of procrastination time. I found that when I was younger, before I like understood ADHD and how it worked, I would sit at a computer for hours not doing anything when I had something to do, and
Mhm.
realizing like that's actually a waste of time. I can be doing something else. So, learning when it's time to just get up and go do something else and come back to it, and learning how to create a schedule that is structured enough but free enough so that you're sandwiched in. You have to do things in a certain amount of time so you don't have time to procrastinate. But it all depends. I mean, there's so many different things, and it really, I think, depends on the person. I've found that a lot of people lately, especially, find it to be, I don't know if frustrating is the word, but maybe discouraging to see some of the accommodations that other people use and say, like, I tried that and that didn't work for me. As a coach, I find that it's really important to help people find what works for them depending on like what their specific symptoms are, because right, like even if we all have ADHD, we're all still very different, and what works for me might not
Mhm.
work for the next person. So really kind of focusing on what motivates me, what interests me, what are my specific strengths and weaknesses as a person with ADHD, what has worked before, what has not worked before, and really kind of working through those things to find what works for you, and then not getting discouraged or feeling guilty when things don't work, because I find that that often holds up the process of progress,
Mhm.
because you're like, oh, that didn't work, so I quit. Like, I give up, it's not going to work. But being able to kind of like forgive yourself for the trial and error process that is finding what works for you.
Hmm. Thank you for that. And hearing you say those things and us talking about accommodations and strategies helps me realize that there might be some folks that interact with this episode of the podcast, and because it is so clearly going to be directed at the experience with ADHD, if they have not been diagnosed, may or may not connect with kind of the conversation or assume they don't when they might. And so, something that a quote, there were a couple of quotes that I really enjoyed from your documentary that I want to hear about after this question. But one of them was, I was able to get the care that I needed to be able to provide the structure that she needed, in reference to your daughter, right? And my curiosity, or a question for you, both as a licensed mental health professional as well as an ADHD coach, is what are some of those signs that Black mamas can look out for, even if culture kind of like tried to knock them out of us? Like, you might need to ask some extra questions and see if you need some support.
Mhm. I there's so many. But difficulty with planning and organizing, difficulty with regulating your focus. I find that, if you see it showing up in multiple areas of your life, so if you find yourself having difficulties at work and difficulties at home, and maybe difficulties with parenting in terms of your ability to plan your time, organize activities, plan ahead for different things, if you find yourself struggling to be on time. I mean, it all depends, because there's some people who like struggle to be on time, which was me real bad before I was diagnosed. And there's some people who are like, I'm always super early because I'm afraid I'm going to
That's
be
me.
late because yeah.
That's me.
So it totally depends on the person. But if you find these symptoms impacting your life and you feel like you're not able to live the life that you feel you should be, it's worth looking into, because it could be ADHD, but it could be a number of other things as well.
Mm. Very true, under that large umbrella of neurodivergence that we are just starting to discuss and reflect on. And the other thing that's really interesting to me is I've seen like a pie chart and different things, and they'll be like, okay, so there's ADHD, there's generalized anxiety disorder, there's trauma, there's so many different reasons that behaviors express. And sometimes it's a mix, sometimes it's one, sometimes it's just who you are. You're just in it. Some folks are just eccentric. I really appreciate that. And one of the things that I've mentioned a couple times, but you have Adulting with ADHD, the documentary. And I think it's so cool that you've been working on just shedding light on ADHD for so many years, you know? And can you talk to me about what your goals were and like what stage of life you were in when you decided you wanted to start this project?
Ooh. Trying to remember exactly what stage I was of life I was in when I did the documentary. I think the book had been out for a couple years. And I was realizing that, like, okay, I need some other ways to educate people about ADHD and show them what it is. And I really wanted something that, if my daughter went back and watched it when she's older, that she could feel like I can do anything still. Like
Mm.
I have a bunch of strengths that come with my ADHD. I can be proud of who I am in spite of this diagnosis. So that was kind of what I had in mind as I was making it, not make it super one-sided, but kind of show a very like realistic. And I don't want to be like one of those like, oh, ADHD is a superpower kind of people, but I did want to be able to show like both sides of the coin when it comes to streaknesses and things that we show up at, my grammar, things that we're good at and things that we might struggle with as well, and ways that sometimes society does not always appreciate our strengths and maybe highlight our weaknesses, but ways that different people have overcome that. And I really wanted to show too how ADHD might show up in different people and not show just like one presentation of it, but how it might impact different people, which I thought it was really interesting to hear stories of different people and how their childhoods impacted their experiences with ADHD growing up and all of those different factors that go into how it might present in adulthood. And with my book and with the documentary, I was really in the space. It was really before ADHD was so big online, where I was like, when I was working with kids and I was noticing that I was working with a lot of kids whose parents also were neurodivergent, and I was trying to find resources to support the parents, there really weren't a lot. There weren't a lot of resources to help adults with ADHD. It was just a lot of if you Googled it, there was just a bunch of resources for children. So I wanted to create something for adults to be able to see themselves and to see that we don't grow out of it. We still have ADHD in adulthood, and this is what it can look like, and this is what it can look like in different people. And there is also hope for people like us.
Hmm. There was one of my favorite parts of the documentary is when you were talking. I don't even remember what you were talking about specifically, but you like paused because you lost a thought in real time and you were like, yep, that thought is gone. That happens to me a lot. And I don't know if I've ever felt so seen in my life and it was awesome because it was like, okay, here we are watching this really well produced and compiled documentary, right? Like visuals, like aesthetic, conversation, like just bomb. Cannot recommend enough. And then you just are like, it's just full realness, right? Like my thoughts leave. It does not mean I don't know what I'm saying. It's not a reflection of incompetence or lack of concern or care. It's just how my brain works.
Hmm.
And I was just like, look at that. I love it.
Yes, when that happened, we're like, oh yes, we're leaving that part in. That is the embodiment of all of this. So yeah.
It is. It is. Let me see. I have so many ways that we can go with this, and I'm trying to decide what else I want to ask. Um, Another thing that really stuck out to me is when you talked about how, I think it was when you made the transition from undergraduate to graduate school, about how you survived getting your tasks done, but you had to work harder than everyone else around you to get it done. It really spoke to me because, again, in certain environments, I would feel like I just naturally thrived. The things I'm good at, I'm really good at. The
Hmm.
things I'm awful at, I'm really awful at. When you're used to having those areas, at least for me, when I'm used to having those areas where I thrive, those areas that I don't feel like super weaknesses, because it's like, wait a second, like I thrive somewhere. Why am I not thriving here? And it's interesting because when you don't know that something's different, or if you just have like a pattern of negative self talk, which I can fall into sometimes, it's really easy to be like, you're lazy. You're not trying hard enough. You're not good enough. And hearing you say it just so clearly, like, but I had to work harder, was such an interesting reframe for me because we think of it as laziness, but really we're trying like several times as hard.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, that going from undergrad to grad was an eye opener as a therapist because in your internship, well, at least for me in the setting that I was working in, it's very open ended in terms of your schedule and choosing when you work and choosing when you do your notes and choosing when all of the things you choose. So at that point, it's no longer this structured thing where this is when you have to show up for class and this is when you have to go to work. These are your hours of work. It's all given to you, which not that I was super good at that either. I was always late for work before that point, late for class, late on assignments, but I got it done in a somewhat, I knew when it was due and I got it done around the due date. And then when my schedule became more open ended, it was like very willy nilly. And so I was getting behind on notes, which I think, I mean, this can happen for any new therapist, but for me, I feel like it was extremely severe. There was not a consequence in the world that would make it, better or easier for me to get things done.
Mm.
I had no concept of planning, of taking notes to remember things like scheduling wise. I had just the whole thing, all the executive functioning things that you need to be able to keep a structured schedule and to get things done on time and to be places on time and do things. I had none of those skills. Like it just was not a thing. So it kind of all fell apart for me. And I was always the one where like other people were like, yeah, I did this assignment already. And here I am the day before. Like I haven't even looked at it yet. I have no idea. But if I don't understand it, I'm screwed because I haven't even looked at the instructions. And so if I ask the professor a day before about the instructions, that's not going to be good. So it was just really difficult for me to keep up during that time. And that's when I was like, I went to my advisor and I was like, I'm falling apart. Like, this is not working. And she was like, well, basically, I don't know what to tell you. So I had to figure it out. But yeah, that was a very difficult, challenging time in my life because of the change in the structure and needing to learn how to organize myself.
Oh my goodness. Well, that makes me think about one, like you said, where folks were like, don't know what to tell you. Even outside of ADHD, because we have such clear stereotypes of what success or such pressing stereotypes of what success looks like in different fields and tasks that there's not really a set of supports to make sure that we have what we need. And one place that my experience was different from yours, just to kind of lean into the diversity of experiences, is that like elementary school and high school, my grades, I would say my grades were fine. Like I was pretty good with like, it wasn't uncommon for me to be on the AB honor roll. But like I said, the things that were difficult for me were really difficult. And then when I transferred schools a lot. So not having a structured place and going to 4 different high schools didn't help, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so then when I was in 5th grade, um, I was just in a whole bunch of chaos talking to this boy who was awful and trash and just making a whole bunch of bad decisions. And so in the end, I ended up graduating high school with like, maybe a C minus, maybe a straight C, something like that. And because that experience and where I graduated was so, because it was so like I'm not excelling and people had already told me I shouldn't be in the talented and gifted program and all this other kind of stuff, I wasn't going to go to college. I didn't see college as a possibility for a number of things. There were a whole lot of other things happening for me at that time too. And so then it just so happened that I was going to school for my last year of high school in a mostly white district where people went to college. Like you don't look at them and say, you're not going to college. That was the expectation, you know?
Yeah.
And so my academic advisor was like, well, I think you should look at some options anyway. This is kind of, forgive me if bad language is not your favorite, but I have to tell this story this way because it makes me laugh.
Mhm.
So I applied for a few schools. I got into like maybe 2 out of like 4 or something like that. And the school I ended up going to, they sent me a letter saying that they would admit me on academic probation. And it was so funny because the way I described the letter when I tell it years later is like I opened it and they were like, all right, bitch, I'm going to give you one chance. Don't fuck this up. Because it had confetti in there, but it was also like, your ass is coming right in on academic probation, you know? It was hilarious. And so, but I took my little academic probation letter And I went to undergraduate prepared for it to be chaos. And when I tell you, I graduated with honors and probably had like 2 classes the entire time that I got like anything less than a B plus in. And it was such an interesting experience because one of my high school best friends, her mother was like, well, I can't believe you're doing this well in school. Mostly because I found out the friend at the time had to obviously be like positioning me as the friend you don't want to be. You know how people can do that? Like, look at
Yep.
this friend who's the one like in trouble and cutting up because I'm great. You know, I realized that's how she had to be doing me. And so her daughter was actually failing in class and I was thriving. And I remember that just that shock on her face and the people that like my family being like, well, I expected nothing else. I've always known who she was. But I realized for me, that structure and that very prescribed set of tasks and responsibilities in primary school, elementary, high school, I could not thrive in that information. But in college, me and my little psychology major, liberal arts through and through, we were having a good old time. And I was able to finally make supports and things that worked for me. And then after undergraduate, somebody was like, you should consider graduate school. And I was like, no, I can't consider graduate school. And then like 3 years later, I went and got my master's in American Studies. And so it's so interesting. And I thought got an A in every course there. And it's just so interesting how for some of us, the structure is the support. And for others of us, the structure is the straitjacket.
Yes. Yep.
And it just blows my mind.
Absolutely. I find that I'm in a really weird middle ground when it comes to that. Like, as an adult, knowing that I have ADHD now, I need a nice mix of both. Like, I'm not that I'm not a 9 to 5 person in that way, but more so like as a therapist, there is some freedom in scheduling and how you structure your schedule. And I feel like if I didn't have that ability to have some freedom in the way that I structure my schedule, I don't know what I would do. So it's like, though the rigid schedule kept me from completely drowning, it also what very much felt like a straitjacket. Elementary through high school, I didn't do I was a C average. I would say, like, for the most part, all the way through elementary, all the way to high school, I was C average. So, like, I was surviving. I wasn't, sometimes I was failing. When it came to science and math, I was failing a lot. And it was always because of small details.
Yep.
Stuff like that, actually, looking back, I'm like, how did nobody notice? Like, for the most part, 2 things. First of all, I think I have dyscalculia too. So even though I can understand math concepts okay, I was counting on my fingers. I mean, I still count on my fingers. And so like that math fluency never really developed for me, no matter how many flashcards we did. So it was just like little things like that and making small mistakes where, if I'm doing a math equation, I make one small mistake, the whole thing is messed up. So I think like those small things are what kind of, it was not only the ADHD, I think, for me, but I think also the math struggles also did not help in math or science growing up.
And mine that I didn't, because I, like you say in the documentary, like people don't really talk about dyscalculia a lot. And I don't know a whole lot about it either. And when I was reading certain definitions, they say folks who have issues with spelling could potentially fall under that umbrella as well. And I have never been able to spell. Like, I tell people, like, I can write all day. I can talk all day, form an idea all day. Ask me to spell anything, and if our life depends on it, we're all dying. World is over. No life for anybody if I have to spell. And of course, the word that is really hard to spell that everyone struggles with is like diarrhea. I couldn't spell diarrhea if my life depended on it.
Oh yeah,
But
I don't think I could do that for you right now if I needed to.
it's so bad, even autocorrect can't pick it up. Like, that's
Right.
how bad. It is so bad. But yes, I remember the course that like kicked my butt the most that I just could not get through. And I have no idea who the idiot was that put me in AP economics. I don't know how that happened. It should have never happened. But again,
Wow.
white school districts with an expectation of excellence, they're going to put you where you got to be because their school got to look good. And when I tell you, I failed up until like the last second of class, and then I graduated with a C. That class was so hard, but like you said, it was those little details, like the things you had to remember, like the concepts, like the equations, all of these different things. The only thing I can remember for sure out of that class is at the time that the chair of the Federal Reserve was Ben Bernanke. I think that was his name. Other than that, I can't tell you. I think that was his name, something Bernanke. It started with a B. But yes, so again, to your point, there's so many of these little bitty things happening, and being older and having that distance and saying like, wait a second, you're not dumb or a failure. You missed a detail, and so many things are based on, have a compound effect.
Mm-hmm.
That if you miss like one little thing, it's all going to just kind of fall apart. And something I want to say to you before we switch gears is, and I didn't think of this till today, if I had to name a book that shows ADHD, I know exactly what book it is, and I want to see if you can guess what it is. It's a very common childhood book.
Was it a book we had to read in school, or just a book that like we would have read for fun?
I think both. I think it's very common to read with kindergartners. I'll tell you, it has an animal protagonist.
I don't know. Huh.
Want me to tell you? I know it was a random question you weren't expecting.
Yeah, I'm like trying to recall kids' books. I mean, I'm sure. Okay, yeah, you can tell me.
If You Give a Mouse a Cookie.
Oh, okay.
To me, that is the most ADHD-ass book I have ever seen. And the way that came to me is, so when I was preparing to chat with you, again, in true ADHD fashion, this is you maybe like a week and a half ago about this. Time's passing, and then this morning at like 9 a.m., I was like, I should spend some time thinking about what we're going to talk about in this conversation. And then like me preparing turned into, you should probably wear one of your Free Black Motherhood shirts. You know what you should do? You should put those pictures on the wall that have been on the floor for months. You should move your computer. You should delete the storage on your phone so you have places to keep clips. Like, it just kept going and going and going. And then I was like, wait a second. This is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. And it just doesn't stop.
I love that. I think I have that. Now I feel like I'm going to pull that out and read it and see the connection.
Do it with an ADHD lens, and I'm telling you, it's gonna be a hoot. I'm gonna check it out at the library and read again myself, because I saw myself in that little mouse when I was thinking about that.
Aww.
And it's one of my favorite things to read with my children, and I've gone to read it at a couple times at the school. And so, kind of like returning to the idea of parenting and ADHD, I'm curious if there are things or qualities in how you parent that you don't think would be there if you didn't have ADHD.
That's a good question.
Or might look different, rather.
I guess that's tough. I might still be silly if I didn't have ADHD, but I feel like I'm like the fun parent. I'm really, I would say, just like I like to have fun with my kids. I love video games almost as much as they do. I played tons of video games as a kid, just like they love playing video games. So sometimes we'll play video games together. I feel like I'm very understanding of a lot of the things that they are currently struggling with, because it's like the struggle isn't that far away for me as an adult because of my ADHD. So kind of figuring out how to manage big feelings and figuring out how to organize yourself, all of those things that they are struggling with developmentally at the ages that they are, I feel like I'm still kind of figuring that out. So I'm able to support them with the things that I'm continually working on and learning. So there's this level of understanding about their current experience that I have, I think, because of how much I can relate to what they're going through.
Let's see. What do I think might be different if I didn't have ADHD? I think I'd be less impulsive in the things I do with the kids. Like, I'm very much the kind of mom to like, okay, I'm picking you up from school. Look, there's a random waterfall. Obviously, there's not waterfalls in the middle of Wyoming, but for whatever reason, that's what came to mind. There's a waterfall over there on the roads. Let's go and look at the waterfall. Oh, while you're there, someone has ice cream. Let's go get ice cream. You know what? Maybe we should take a trip this weekend.
Oh, I
Like,
love
it's
that.
very much me to just kind of pick random things. And sometimes that's really cool because they have fun. And other times it's really exhausting when you have big ideas out of nowhere and you want to do them, but you only have limited energy.
That part. It's the limited energy part. I think as I get older, it gets a little bit hard. It's interesting because I'm at this intersection of now chronic illness and ADHD, which is a whole nother
Mhm.
element of parenting too that I think makes it a little bit different for me, which I think is common with
Mhm.
people with ADHD. People frequently have, I'm going to say this so wrong, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and things like that. Chronic pain is common in people with ADHD. So I find that as I get older, that spontaneity and that energy that I once had as a parent isn't as much as it once was. So there's
Mm.
that added challenge as a parent too.
That makes sense. I really do appreciate like thinking about it with those layers because I don't have a diagnosis of a chronic illness. And also my mom, she has lupus and a few other autoimmune disorders.
Hmm.
And so just kind of watching those journeys and also knowing that so much of that, similar to ADHD, is hereditary,
Hmm. Hmm.
and what will the future look like? Because you're already dealing with muscle tension or some joint pain or something like that. And I was having this conversation with my mom just last week. You never know. Like, it could stop there and you could have regular arthritis and things like that, or it could, balloon and shift into something else. So I'm holding space for that journey of mothering with chronic health as well as ADHD. And I am also
Hmm.
looking in the window and just really curious how things will shift and show up for you and others throughout life.
Absolutely. I've found that that journey has been an interesting one. A lot of grief in the parent that I thought I would be because of chronic illness, in addition to the ADHD. But as I get further along this journey, I find that my kids are so compassionate. They're so caring. They're so helpful. And I think part of it is because them having to support the fact that they have a mom whose health is not always consistently great. They're very empathetic. They're very understanding because of what they've kind of seen and dealt with. And it's not always easy, I'm sure, for them. It's not easy for me. But I get comments from their teachers all the time about how caring and compassionate they are. And I think part
Mhm.
of that is because of our family and how we've kind of dealt with my chronic illness.
I really like and love hearing that because when I've talked about this with someone else before from a different perspective. I think the person I was talking to was a single mother of multiple children and was talking about how the older children have like kind of always been really compassionate and stepped in to support the younger children. And what you're saying just really reminds me of how, yes, there are things that we see as parent roles and as children's roles. And yes, we want to support and guide them through life. And also, sometimes these challenges help shape them into being some of the world's best people because they understand all of these layers firsthand in ways other people don't.
Exactly. Right. Yes. And that's a good point because I have three. My oldest is 12, and then I have a almost 6-year old and a 11-month old. And I've always been super cognizant of not parentifying my oldest. I don't want her to
Mhm.
feel like she's raising her younger siblings. But like you said, like we can want all the things in the world that we want. But some things like chronic illness, for example, are what they are. And there's sometimes where they are going to have to take on responsibility that other kids maybe don't because of the situation. And of course, I do everything I can to support and create a protective environment. Um, but kind of, I've had to get away from that fear that I'm going to like mess them up, especially as a therapist, because I work with kids and I see the things that happen. I work with adults. I see the things that happen as a result of their childhood. So becoming a little bit more lax about things as a parent and my fears about what's, messing them up has been a journey in that regard.
Hmm. And I think there's so much richness there. I know I want to be mindful of your time, so I'll wrap up soon. But one of the things that just, again, sticks out is so much of the work that I hope to do with Free Black Motherhood is to get people in conversation and dialogue around like our personal theories of mothering, right? And truth be told, it is a very like Western white supremacist idea of family to see us in this individual. Here's the hierarchy. Parents are here. Children are there. Things like this is who pays for this. This is who does that. Like this, again, formula that doesn't work for so many of us.
Yes.
And something that I have really been trying to lean into as I lean on this language of like developing my own personal theory of motherhood is realizing that my goal in life is not to direct my children. My goal is to co create a family with them.
Mm,
And it is okay as we co create those families for people to have roles that may look non normative in comparison to others. And
yeah.
so when I hear, like, yes, I'm very aware and mindful of adultification and parentification, thinking of my own experiences. And also, we're teaching our children to be a community
Yes. Yep.
that like in when you're in a community sometimes you're going to have to be more of the knowledgeable source who's guiding someone, and that's not limited to age. That is just limited, that's just shaped by experience and all these other things. And I know you didn't ask this of me, but I just want to let you know, like, just like our ADHD has allowed us to be creative in all of these other things in our lives, I am confident that in this journey your family and all of y'all will create something that works for you and honors everybody's humanity,
Yes.
regardless of all those scripts out there.
Absolutely. Yep. Amen to that.
Yes. So let me see if I have one more thing I just kind of want to say is excited that our children are growing up with parents who have a better understanding, especially in your case, being an expert on like neurodivergence and things like that, because there's so many pieces that we didn't have, and we tried to put a puzzle together that was missing things. Like, I
Mhm.
like to get things from the thrift store, and one time we bought a game. I don't remember what game it was, and the instructions and half the pieces were missing. And that's how life can feel, when
Yeah.
you are a look person generally, but let alone like a Black woman or girl trying to make sense of the world around you. Like, someone sold you a box, told you this is what you needed, and everything wasn't there. And I really love seeing my daughter and how, like, before you and I were chatting, I said something and she just looked at me and she said, "What do you mean by that?" Mind you, she's 6. And it was such a simple statement, right? But it was profound because as a child, I didn't know. When I didn't understand, it wasn't necessarily my fault.
Wow.
And that I could ask someone, just tell me what you mean, right?
Yes. Wow.
And we're empowering our children to ask what people mean. Isn't that exciting?
I love that. Yes. Wow. Yeah, I
Is
can relate so much to that, not asking questions. Still to this day, I'm working on that.
Yep,
That's a journey.
I am too. But I am going to be linking to your book and your website and your documentary and Instagram page in the show notes for this chat. And I'm incredibly thankful for your time and want to stay in like intentional community and contact. And I just want to know, is there anything else you want to share about like mental health or liberated Black mothering or your own efforts or dreams for you and your family?
Ooh. That's so right now um kind of not shifting because I feel like it's all connected. It's all very much in the same boat, but I'm shifting into equity in terms of like medical care. For example, medical gaslighting, and we talked about the fetal maternal mortality rates and all of that kind of stuff, care for Black women in the medical system in the US. So I'm really cognizant of spreading information about that. I'm working on a book about that. And so I really just look out for that. I hope that that's something that's valuable for your audience and mine in the near future. So, That is what I'm currently working on and passionate about.
I'm excited. And look, one thing I'll send you a message about off of here is thinking about how when you have ADHD, and a lot of times that comes with issues of memory, and how hard it is to fill out a medical form and get a diagnosis or acknowledgement when you don't remember what's happening with your body.
Yes, yes, exactly right.
There's so much there that comes up for me on some of the journeys that I'm on. And so the for real final question, I had an idea in true ADHD fashion when I asked that last question. What does free Black motherhood look or feel like to you?
Ooh, I don't know. I guess what give me an example. What does it look like for you? And then I can piggyback off of that.
Okay. So for me, free Black motherhood looks like knowing when I need to craft my own model versus when I should rely on or lean into someone else's.
Mm, yes. Ooh, I kind of even want to steal that, but let me see if I can elaborate on that. I would say letting go of the expectations. I think we had talked before and I was saying like my whole platform, the essence of me is kind of being a rebel and feeling like I don't have to do what people think I should be doing. Of course,
Mhm.
I do what I think is best. I think I do what I think is effective and helpful for me and my family, but kind of letting go of these ideas of what I should be doing and especially breaking myself free from the neurotypical parenting advice that is out there that I feel in the past has brought shame for me and kind of coming to terms with the fact that I don't have to do it that way. I can do it my way.
Yay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Gloria, it has been a pleasure chatting with you in this way. And like I said, I have a whole lot of other thoughts. I'm going to message you off of here. And I just want to say thank you for your time, your advocacy, and your presence.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course.